All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have my guest today, Betsy Byler. Betsy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So Betsy is on a mission to share with therapists the ways they can address substance use using their already existing skills. She loves taking topics that are typically aimed specifically at substance use counselors and sharing them in a way that is relevant and tailored to meet every therapist's needs. In her own words, she says, by adding substance use to your scope of practice, you can expand your ability to treat the whole person and better meet your client's needs, bringing more hope, healing, and freedom to the people you serve. Awesome. All right, Betsy, before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are now.
Great. I grew up in Chicagoland, so pretty much anything that's within 30 miles of Lake Michigan is considered Chicagoland, although not Chicago proper. They get really touchy about that.
Okay.
And so I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, and now I'm living in Northwest Wisconsin, about 2.5 hours from Canada. My office is like 6 miles from Minnesota, and Lake Superior is right here.
Wow.
So it's woods. I live in the country, and we have an adolescent bear who likes to visit. And so I have to check for him if I'm going to leave the house.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. See, no. Look.
Yeah.
No.
As a former city girl, it was really quite a stretch living up here.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Look, let's get right into it here. How the heck did you get into this field?
Well, I started with a number of therapists in high school. I was pretty out of hand, using a lot of drugs, a total nightmare for my mom. Not that she would have said that, but at the time it was hard, and I saw 9 different therapists until I
Whoa. Now look, I'm going to ask you to slow things down a bit, and you don't have to talk about whatever you don't want to talk about. Why the heck were you seeing 9 therapists?
Because I didn't like any of them. I mean, I was difficult. My mom would say that I went through life like a Mack truck. And she also said it was an honor and a privilege to be my mom. So it wasn't necessarily a criticism. It was just the way I always was.
Was something going on?
Yeah. So when it was probably my parents' divorce, and then just sort of the stress of that. And then I found drugs and fell in love.
How old were you when your parents divorced?
My parents divorced the first time when I was 3, and then married each other again a year later.
Wow.
And then they divorced again when I was 10.
Okay.
And then I had some medical trauma. I broke my left hip when I was 11 and had surgeries and surgeries and surgeries.
Oh, man.
And so when I started like experimenting with drugs and using them, it was really, I think, to treat anxiety, but I didn't know that, of course, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became its own thing, and it was really instant for me. It wasn't like a slow progression. It was like one day, and I tried it, and I was like, yep, this is my thing.
What did you try?
So really it was, I think I had drank a couple times, but really it was marijuana that I started with and fell in love with, and then was smoking probably 4 or 5 times a day for like 3 years.
Wow, at that young of an age.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, not at 11. We're like 14, 15 here.
Okay. Well, still.
But I was like really hard to nail down. I still was doing okay in school, and I just was very much hard for anyone to get through to. I was really resistant, angry, and my mom blackmailed me into therapy. She found who I was using with, because we didn't have texting or cell phones or any of that. This is like 92. And so we were writing all this down, like in a way that was stupid. But she found out who I was using with and said if I didn't go to therapy, that she would call their parents. Mm-hmm. And what do you do? Right. You go to therapy. And when I found Betsy, she was the therapist that I finally landed with. And there aren't a lot of Betsy's running around. And I don't remember what she said, but I remember in the very first session feeling like, okay, like maybe we can do this.
So after how many therapists did you find? So obviously you're Betsy and this therapist is Betsy.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make that clear for our listeners. She was a ninth there. Okay. Okay. But let me just say, it takes a lot of, I think, in part, guts to go see a therapist in the first place and to keep going. Granted, you were blackmailed, but you went to your ninth and you found Betsy and you're like, all right, what did she do that made you say that or feel that? Or what was she like that made you say that?
I think she didn't treat me as though I was like a delinquent. She didn't act shocked. She didn't lecture me or tell me that I was putting myself in danger, which I absolutely was. Mm-hmm. But she, I think, treated me as though I wasn't like a dumb adolescent and I felt respected. And she was not interested in getting in a power struggle with me. And that was kind of the biggest deal. And she asked me whatever question she asked me, which I don't remember now. I remember being kind of surprised because she caught me off guard. And I was like, that was good. I mean, I was a very bright teenager. And so I was very good at presenting a certain way, talking a certain way, acting a certain way. And she really cut through all that really quickly. And it was interesting. And
wow.
And so I felt like, all right, maybe this is an adult that I can talk to. And she was. And so I recall at some point being in her office and thinking, I could do this. I could do this kind of work someday. Someday when I'm sober and an adult, I could work with kids like me.
Wow, this is really interesting. So conversely, what did the other therapists do that you didn't made you not feel respected and perhaps did engage you in a power struggle?
I remember the one right before her. He was an addiction specialist, and I sat down very first time we saw each other, and I forget what he asked me, but I started telling him a story, and his response was to interrupt me and then say, "Don't you know you could get hurt?" And I was like, and I'm pretty sure I told him to F off, and then I left. And I was not interested in having someone come at me like that. When you're in a single parent household, I find that, at least with the kids I see, your relationship with your primary parent is a little bit different. It's a little less like hierarchical because it's just a little different. And so I was really not having some dude who didn't know me talk to me like he was a parent, and I wasn't having it. Or I felt like they were being really cheesy and treating me like I was a child or doing too much of the, how do you feel? And, and it didn't seem genuine. And I just absolutely couldn't handle that.
So you're in therapy with Betsy, who seems amazing. How do things unfold for you?
Well, we lost our health insurance. And so at the time, of course, I didn't totally understand what that meant. But the job my mom had, she always worked for nonprofits, did grant writing and whatnot. And she had lost her job. And we lived in a town where we have like in the top 10% paid teachers in the country, like very well off, very I don't know, we had an excellent education. Everyone had lots of money. And so that was really different. And so we lost our health insurance. And so I stopped seeing Betsy after a while because paying out of pocket was just expensive, I guess. And so I didn't end up staying with her for a really long time. I mean, it was several months for sure. And I did talk about some of the stuff that was happening. And when you're using really heavily, bad stuff goes down. Like I was definitely in situations that were super dangerous. Traveling to get drugs from, going to places like downtown Chicago or Joliet, or places that were really unsafe for 16-year-old girls to be going by themselves. And so I did talk with her about that, and I was really honest. And she challenged me about why I was using, because I was very much saying, like, I just like to it. I'm not using it to cope with feelings. And she really challenged a lot of that. And she was absolutely right. The fun part stopped being fun long before, like it, and that happens with everyone's use. You stop using just because you're experimenting and have fun, and you're using for other reasons now.
So, okay, you go through that process. At some point you stop seeing Betsy. How do things progress such that I want to be a therapist? And more specifically, I want to work with substance use.
So that was kind of a process. I got sober early. It was March of 1996. And so I was 18-ish, 18 and a half. And I'd been in college and two different colleges by that point. And I've always been decent at school. It doesn't really take a whole lot of effort. And so I was able to skate through quite a bit. And I just got to the place where I just needed to quit. It didn't fit as well. And I was kind of tired of feeling like I was always going to get in trouble and hiding stuff and lying and all of the life that goes with that. And so I got sober and decided that I wanted to work with kids, which I'd always wanted to, kids being teenagers for me, and worked my way to get to Michigan State, which was the fourth and final bachelor's school I went to, and was getting a degree in psychology. And I was actually in youth ministry at the time with an organization called Young Life. And I attracted kids who were like me at that age. So I had a bunch of girls I worked with who were smoking weed all the time and kind of rough around the edges and wouldn't normally go for like a youth group sort of thing, but I don't know, I attract them and loved that. But I found that my girls needed more than I could do, because trauma was absolutely everywhere. And I couldn't find adolescent therapists who could work with my girls and that they liked them. They would come back and be like, nope, I'm not seeing her. I don't like her. And I had planned on being in Young Life, that organization, like full time as a staff person, but a bunch of job opportunities that should have been a shoe-in and looked like they were going to be fine exploded. Like I had graduated from Michigan State in 2000 and was sober all through that. And these opportunities just exploded one by one. And I was working for a tech company, and this is when the tech company started exploding also, but in a bad way, in 2000. And so I got laid off, and I was sitting in my room for like 3 weeks playing guitar and watching movies, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and decided, like, well, what if I decided to become a therapist after all? And within 48 hours, I had applied and was sitting in an interview at the school I went to. And I hadn't taken the GRE. It was past time to apply. But when I decide to do a thing, I tend to do it. So I ended up in grad school in the fall of 2001. And from that time, knew that I wanted to work with teenagers. they are my favorite still. Teenagers that hate everyone and use drugs is one of my specialty. And it's expanded to, I work with a lot of adults too, but that's kind of how I went from where I thought my life was going to go into youth ministry to what I do now.
Okay, so let's talk about what you do now. But first, I love the way you put that. You know, you love working with kids who hate everything and everyone. And from what you said already, you know, we might understand why, but I want you to articulate why you like working with that particular group and what it is you feel you can give them.
I don't work with anyone under high school age. I'm a little bit allergic to middle schoolers. I raised two of them, and it's just a hard age, middle school. And so I prefer when we get to high school, and I feel like people at that age, they are starting to see that they can make choices outside of what the family says or wants, or what their history was meant to be, that they can decide for themselves and they own their own choices. And that is where I tend to thrive with people. Like, yep, I realize that this has been really hard and that you had these challenges. And how do we help you do something different in light of all of it? Absolutely, that has been a struggle, and this will be a struggle. And I want to help you make the choice that you want going forward. And a lot of the kids I tend to see don't have a lot of parent involvement and not a lot of really responsible adults. And I tend to end up being that person. And I'm not overly involved. I'm really careful about my boundaries, although I'm not saying that I haven't wanted to adopt some, because I absolutely want to, and know that that's not what my job is. And it's still hard at times when I see kids that I know just need a chance. And I do what I can to rally people around them. But I love watching self-determination and helping kids find their voice, and watching them being able to accept that these things happened and it wasn't my fault, or I can do differently, or I don't have to stay in this place. And I don't treat them like they're in a lot of danger. A lot of the kids I see do lots of super dangerous things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really scary for me, like as a mom and as an adult. And I remember being that age and feeling really old and not feeling like I was a kid in an adult playground. And so I don't treat them like they are. And there are times, like when one of my clients said to me, this was years ago, she was 16 and her boyfriend was heavily involved in gangs. And she told me she was going to deliberately get pregnant because he was going to prison. And she wanted to have a connection to him. She was dead serious. And so therapist face comes in really helpful, right? When I'm like, okay, so how did you come to that decision? And have you talked with him about that? And what does he think? I mean, and that's sort of the internal mom response of what?
Right.
And so having that ability to just, as kids tell me stuff, not responding in a way that turns them off. I am clear when I'm like, let me be very clear. I don't want you to use.
Right.
And I'm not going to give you crap about it. I am going to talk about some risks and then we'll be done.
Mm-hmm.
And they respond really well to that.
It sounds very much like you were replicating what you shared with Betsy. And I mean, that, and that's amazing. I mean, you needed that. You responded to that. And also, Betsy, it really feels like you're a no BS person, and yet you're doing this in a very real, non-judgmental way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and also telling them that take care of their shit, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I am very blunt and I do sort of swear a lot. And it is something that is very quickly with me why they settle. And I can see it when they do. They're all, I don't know about this and who are you? Because I'm their mom age and past now.
Right.
Like, and they are like wondering if I'm going to be a certain way. And when I'm not, they're like, all right.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, great. Let's have a real conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Betsy Byler. Her website is betsybyler.com. That's BETSYBYLER.com. Okay. So what do you do now? Who are you working with now? How are you working with them now?
Okay. So I worked in community mental health pretty much since the day I started 19 years ago until 2019, the fall right before COVID, I went into private practice. I had been a clinical supervisor and then a director at two different agencies, supervising staff, which was my other passion. Like, I love doing supervision. And I think that it's part of a way to flex other skills. And I really love seeing therapists feel confident and competent, and that conscious competence that you get to of feeling like, yeah, I do pretty well at this. And I love that. And so when I went into private practice, I took my clients with me because I had always been part clinical. And so mostly I see high school and adults of kind of any age, but I really try to take people that specifically need me, my style, my set of skills. And because I ran a substance abuse program and a mental health program for all those years, I tend to get those referrals. This is a small area. My whole county has 40,000 people. So it's a small pond.
Right.
And I've been here for 14 years up in this area. And so people know me really well. So that's kind of who I work with now. The thing that I missed was doing supervision and consultation with people, because I had the same staff. I had virtually no turnover like that whole time, and loved nurturing my staff. It started to get in conflict with the money people in the agency, the budgets. And at one point somebody suggested that we double book therapy appointments. And I was like, all right, that's the hill on which I will die.
Right.
Like that will be the day. And so that was my style of supervision, was something my staff wanted. They would get really cranky if I canceled. And so when I was instructed to shorten it or get rid of it altogether, that sort of brought the end of my community mental health space. So when the pandemic happened, I knew that I would want to do something more than therapy someday. And so I thought, okay, what is important to me? What do I want to talk about? And I won't get bored. And honestly, it's substance use, because most of us didn't get trained in school. And there's really no reason for that. There's no like rules saying we can't do substance use. It's just not part of the licensing exam. So it's not part of the program, and vice versa. And it comes up all the time.
Right.
And yet most therapists feel under-equipped, like a fish out of water. Sometimes people will say to me, and they don't know what to do. And I'm really passionate about, we have all the skills we need. We just need to know how to use them. And so that's when I started the podcast, the All Things Substance podcast, and am launching a group program this fall. And also, I don't know when we want to talk about that or if we have time to talk about that, but that's kind of where all that started. Was I have my practice and I'm really enjoying not being in charge of anybody. Like, that's really cool. I haven't had that in a really long time, and I thought I would really miss it. And I miss the people, but I don't miss all the rest of it. But I wanted a way to kind of flex this other muscle of mine of how I really do love to work with therapists and help them feel more competent and confident about the things they do.
So with this topic of substance abuse, and we said in the bio, you feel like a lot of therapists already have these skills. They just really don't know how to use them. Give us an example.
Sure. So I did this I talked about this in a podcast, I think it was last week, about DBT skills. DBT skills are totally transferable to substance use. So if we'll talk about, there's a emotion regulation and distress tolerance skill they call TIP. That's about temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. And I talked about how when someone's having a craving to use, that these are all really useful things for someone to be, this kind of skill is really useful for someone to manage that craving, because cravings last anywhere between 8 and 15 minutes or so. It's a little like having a panic attack. And most people who are using, their distress tolerance is pretty low. And that's what they need in order to kind of work on sobriety in whatever form, even if they're not totally abstinent, because there's lots of different pathways to recovery, and recovery looks different for everybody. That moving them from a place of using substances to cope, instead, hopefully some of them can use substances recreationally. I don't know who is and who can't. It's completely different for everybody. But I feel like DBT skills in general, teaching them to be mindful of the moment they're in, and that it's just this moment, be in it, notice it, let it go by. Teaching them about interpersonal effectiveness or distress tolerance or emotional regulation. Every one of those skills can be used to help substance use.
How do you, with the understanding that with a lot of substance abuse, there's an underlying trauma. How does that come into play here in terms with you as a therapist? I mean, let's say you're working with a young kid. How does that come up? How do you bring that up or allow them to bring that up? Or is that just something that comes out in time?
Well, I'm an EMDR therapist primarily. So even though I work with substance use, primarily I am a mental health therapist using EMDR for the most part. Not for everything, of course. I have plenty of clients who are, just have depression or what have you. But I really, truly believe in EMDR. And I thought it was some voodoo magic bullshit for I wouldn't train in it for years. I'm like, what is that?
Right.
And then I had clients who weren't getting better. And I really, truly needed better skills. And I was like, all right, fine. I'll look at the research. It seemed solid. And I fell in love with it. And so I don't require sobriety for someone to do EMDR. It depends on what they're using and how much and when, but I set boundaries around our therapy hour. So let's say somebody smokes weed every day. I'm asking them to not smoke for 4 hours before they come to see me, because they're not actively high. They're not actively in withdrawal, which for weed is really just being cranky and having a headache and having trouble sleeping, but they're not distanced from time and space. If they're actively high, and I've seen that go really badly when one of my clients came in and I didn't know they were high, and we did a processing session, and it actually made the target memory go through the roof. And it was a whole bunch of dissociation, and I, pulled the plug on it really fast, but I couldn't tell that this person was high. And what I need for people to be is to be sober when they're with me. And then sometimes I'll ask them not to smoke for a couple hours after they see me, and talking with them about the why. I want you to sit with this. I want you to pay attention to your emotions. I want you to practice the things we talked about before you smoke again. Fully knowing they're going to, because when you smoke weed all the time, that's your day.
Right.
It's just part of it.
So you talked, as we kind of wind down here, you talked about courses you were putting together. Let's briefly talk about that.
So the podcast is there for anyone who needs it. And that has tons of information on substances and all sorts of things like addiction myths and recovery stories. And it's, 93 episodes this coming week.
Is it for therapists?
Yep.
Okay.
It's for therapists.
Okay.
And it is meant to be this resource that people can count on, that I have given them accurate information that is useful, that isn't a whole bunch of they have to sort through it and figure out what they need. I'm picking out the things that, all right, if we're going to talk about crack or we're going to talk about kratom, I'm going to tell you what you need to know. You don't need to go look for it, but here are all the resources and all of the sources that I used. But then the course, I truly believe, and I know this is going to sound maybe a little arrogant to some, I believe that over the 14 years that I supervised, that I figured out what people need to know about substance use in order to do the work. Now, I'm not talking about being a specialist. I'm not even talking about advertising that you do substance use.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about like just being competent when someone brings it up or you notice it. I believe that I know the basics of what they need to know, and that I can teach that in a way that builds on each other and isn't them trying to sort through all of the information they could know. No. Here's what you need to know. When something comes up later, like you might need to get some consultation around that, but the course includes a monthly group consultation call for 6 months afterwards. It's a 6-week course, and then there's 6 follow-up calls.
Is it a live course or
Yep.
is it online? Okay, it's
Yep.
a live.
It's a virtual live course.
Virtual live course. Okay. And do they meet once a week?
And that's 6 weeks. Yep. So once a week for 2 hours.
Okay.
And there'll be replays, of course. And then there's some worksheets and things they can use with their clients. And I teach them about how to ask the questions, what to ask, what those answers mean, when to know if you need a referral to someone who is a specialist, because this is outside of our wheelhouse, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And then having those consultation calls, people can use them or not. But having a time where if they have cases where they're like, well, what the crap is this?
Right.
And like, ask me about it. And we can talk about, well, if this was a situation I was dealing with, this is how I might approach that.
Uh-huh.
And wanting to know the people who are going to be in the course, I want to know their theoretical orientation so that I can beforehand look up what those major skills are, so that I can speak directly to, okay, you use EFT.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's how some skills in EFT translate, so that I can really help people understand this is how you can use this in your day-to-day practice. And so that when substance use pops up, you don't feel like frozen of like, I don't know what to do with this, or is this a problem, or how do I handle that? And it's not some certification, and it's not gonna, be tons of more school. So that was kind of the idea. And eventually I hope to have it where people can do it on their own if they wish. But I really enjoy like a smaller group program type setting.
This sounds awesome. So I'll have a link for that up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Now, when is it going to be? Because I noted there is a wait list right now.
Right. So the wait list is for people to get information when the registration opens.
Right.
So registration will open in mid-October.
Okay.
And we'll be starting in November. And it's going to be a small group, like maybe 12 people. Like I wouldn't want anything bigger, because I really want people to feel like they're engaging with me. They get my attention and time and can ask questions that are specific to them, rather than this giant situation where, I've been to hear Bessel van der Kolk talk, and there were like 1,000 people in the room.
Right.
And that's helpful to hear him speak, but also I would be like, well, what about this? And that's what I want. I want it to be practical. Like I do not have time for bullshit, and I know other people don't either. And so, and if people don't dig my style,
sure,
I do want people to know, like, this is what I'm like kind of all the time.
Right.
So that they know what they're getting into. But I do love our work, and I love supporting people in it.
Well, you are a breath of fresh air. I got to tell you that. And I love your style, and it's no BS. And I think your course sounds really, really helpful for therapists. All right. So what's the best way, as we kind of wind down here, Betsy, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Sure. So the website is Betsy Byler. It's like Tyler with a B. I usually tell people when they're trying to figure out how our last name is spelled. And it's betsybyler.com. You can email me which is betsy@betsybyler.com. I'm not at the point where I don't answer emails, that it's so big. I'm happy to answer emails and to engage with people and get ideas if they want me to talk about something on the podcast, or they have a question, or they have an issue with something I say. Like, I'm more than happy to talk. So That's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, Thank you so much. I'd love to have you back at some point. And I just really appreciate you sharing your background, and it's inspiring to hear you talk about, your own experience and your own struggles and challenges as a kid, and how you use those to work with other young kids. I mean, it's really awesome.
I think, lucky that I have won the trust of the kids that I've seen over the years. And I always, like, that isn't lost on me, that they choose to trust me with their emotions and themselves. And I truly love it.
Well, that speaks to you, right? That speaks to you, who you are and how you're engaging them. And that's awesome. So, Betsy, thank you so much. We'll be in touch.
Thanks so much.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.